Welcome to the Analytics of Dynasty, a special event here. If you're listening on the podcast feed, it's got accompanying video. I'm your host, Jordan McNamara, and this is a really exciting day for the Analytics of Dynasty. So with me is Carlo, who's been working on some projects with me, and we're gonna walk through it. But we've created a masterpiece or a monstrosity or something to totally fuel your Dynasty addiction. And it is the AOD player comparison engine. So the AOD player comparison engine is going to allow you to do a ton of incredible things. It is going to allow you to compare players and come up with your own comps on players and search for them in a bunch of different ways. And I think the best way to think about this is, if nothing else, and you can go a long ways on this, if nothing else, this will give you an idea of what a player's future ADP is going to be. And I think that alone is an immensely valuable thing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through the value. And so we're going to walk you through, a couple of examples. But if you are listening to this in podcast form, in the show notes to this podcast will be the link to this video. And I'll also include the link to the website as well where it exists. So Carlo, thank you for joining us. This has been a fun building experience. We've learned much about some of this data already. So I'm excited for people to actually get in and look at this because there's just so many players and so many things you can do with it. I think it's going to be really fascinating about some of the stuff that we can do. Yeah,
I mean, I've already spent like hours on this thing, like almost to the point of insanity. I mean, really, it comes from the fact that I see a lot of people in the industry or in the community doing a lot of these player comps type of analysis, and I want to give we're really giving everyone the ability to do their own version of that. You pick the statistics that you care about. We can find similar players and let's see what they did, what those profiles did. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And I just love the ability to, one of the things about the Analytics of Dynasty and what I've always sort of hoped for and wanted is to allow people the tools to do it on their own. And if that's not being dependent on some provider of draft position, that's great. If it's not searching on Twitter for trade stuff, that's great. You should be able to do it on your own. If it's not working on, hey, how should I rank these players? I need to go look at these players. No, we give you the tools to do that, right? And that's always sort of been the premise of the Analytics of Dynasty. This is going to allow you to do it more. And I'm super excited about this, and I think it's really going to be great because it's going to allow you to do so many different things and give you a lot of freedom. So I'm going to pull up the screen here, and we're going to do a little screen share. Show you what we're talking about. So this is the big unveil here. So this is the Analytics of Dynasty player comparison engine. And it's really good because what it allows you to do is go through here, and you'll see up here on the top of the screen is where it has your players. And you can go through and you can search all sorts of different players. And it's got all the historical players as well. We're going to use Jalen Reagor as an example in this, but you can go through and search. And the best part about it is you can go through and just search. It'll give you a drop down. If you click in it, it'll give you a drop down menu, or you can go in and look. Like I said, we're going to use Jalen Reagor. You just type Jalen Reagor's name in, click Jalen Reagor, and it'll pop up some comparison. So that's how you search the player. And then the comparison stats this is basically the stats that you want to look at, like how this player compares to other players, right? And so if we wanted to look at Jalen Reagor, what we're really looking at is we want to know, guys that are his ADP this year, and his current ADP is 55. We want to know guys like that who last year averaged 7.2 points per game. What do those players look like? That's ultimately a question that we are asking is, what do those players look like? Okay. And then those are the comparison stats. And then the stats we're analyzing for, right? What do they look like? Well, what do we want to know, right? This is what do we want to know about these players? So for us, we picked, for this example, and this is the default, this is positional ADP for year 2. And I'll explain that in a second. And it's yards per game, and it's Y1 yards per game or year 1 yards per game. So what this means is very simple. right now, as we exist, we're in year one. And so that'll be, if at any point you see year one, that means right now. Year two means next year, or year three means 2 years out. And so those sorts of things. If there's a situation where it's Y-1, that means last year. And so that's really, that's what we're doing. So prior season point per game, and the positional ADP for this year is what we're looking at. So we want to know, what do those guys look for? What do they look like in future years? For two different things we're looking for. We're looking for positional ADP next year, and we want to know what the points per game are this year. And so this goes through, and you put in Jalen Reagor, and you put in those stats. Then we have a couple filters here. So Carlo, you want to explain the minimum game filter and what that means?
Yeah, so especially when you're looking at something like, we're trying to project here, we're trying to see what direction is Jalen Reagor's ADP going to go in, right? Now we're finding the 10 closest comps, and we're going to take the average of next year's ADP for these players. What I found was, if it just happened to be that the closest players were players that got injured next year, or they didn't play the full season, that correlates to a big drop in ADP. Now, the question is that injury actually causal? Like, I don't think that just because they had that prior points per game or that particular ADP, that's what caused them to get injured. So really, we're trying to project based on this, if they play a full season or close to a full season, what's their ADP going to be like? So you can set the minimum games for your comparison players. So in this situation, we want players that play at least 13 games in the year following the comparison year itself, if that makes sense. So in this situation, we're assuming that Jalen Reagor will play 13 or more games this season. We don't want to include people that they drop due to a catastrophic injury. Another thing I want to note, you'll see those little radio buttons there. This kind of important too. We know in Dynasty that age and or experience in the league are highly correlated to not just production, but also the value of the player. So we have 3 options for you. You can choose all your comps to be the same age, or your comps to have the same experience, which is what we went for here, because we're really looking for players that are going into their second year. Or you can lock both together. So we want players that are the same age, same experience. I wouldn't recommend that, because you're going to have a much smaller sample size of players that were the exact same age at the exact same experience level.
Right. And I think when you sort of look through it too, you can sort of do an eye test, like, hey, maybe they're a year older, so maybe you want to adjust for that. Or, all the comps are, maybe this player came in really young, like Reagor did. And you can see some of the comps for him, like there's some 22 and 23-year-olds, but a couple of them are 24, and then there's a couple of them are 25 too. So you can sort of eyeball that as well.
Definitely situational. I think experience is a lot better in terms of grouping them together when they're on their rookie contract, for example. So because we're going to have things play into it there, especially when you're looking at running backs. You've got third-year running backs, or people going to their 4th year. Most of the time it's a contract year. That's going to affect things. Now, when you get into wide receivers that are on their second contract, usually age is going to be a better statistic to group by, because we want to look at the Devontae Adams, the 28-year-old range. Does that mean that they're going to decline in value and whatnot? So you've got to use your own domain knowledge to pick the right grouping.
Yeah. So what you'll see here is, so underneath that, so this will give you the results. So this will tell you Jalen Reagor, this is 2021 we're looking at. He plays wide receiver. This is his second year in the league, and he will be 22 years old. And his positional ADP currently from the Analytics Dynasty real draft position tracker is 55. And last year he had 7.2 points per game. Right. So that's how you read that across. And now he doesn't yet have a positional ADP for year 2, which would be next year. And we don't know what his points per game are for this year. That's what this is going to tell you. Okay. So then it'll pull up your comps, right? So this is the group of players. This is the 10 players that closest compare to the inputs that we put for Reagor. So it closest compares to, they're all wide receivers. And then you're looking for year 2 around the ADP and around the points per game. And what you're doing is you're looking to see how do they do this year and what do they look like value-wise next year. Those are the two things we're solving for. So this will show you all of the stuff for Rager. So Leonard Hankerson, Julian Edelman in 2010, Mohamed Massaquoi in 2010 as well, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Devon Bess, Stills, Anthony Miller, Alshon Jeffrey, Devin Funchess, Michael Gallup, and then it shows across all their stats. Down at the bottom here, and we'll tinker with this a little bit, and I'll have Carlo walk through this again. This will tell you the comp summary. So this is going to tell you, and this would be what his positional ADP.
His
guys that look
ADP is 55, and
right.
Of the 10 comps that we found, the average was 52, the positional ADP, and then the average of the 10 comps for last season's points per game was 7.25, and Rager's was 7.2. Now, the reason that we include this is if you include a certain combination of stats, or if the player you're looking at is just an exceptional outlier, you'll find that you can't get 10, like a decent sample size of 10 comparisons. So the example I gave was George Kittle, like his yards per route run is outrageous, yards per game, points per game outrageous. So if you start putting things like his age, so I want to lock his age in, I want to lock his draft capital, I want to lock his experience in, then I want to see people that had similar points per game and similar yards per route run. Those people don't exist, right? So we're going to find the 10 closest people, but you'll see the group's average is going to be a lot lower for points per game, and the group's average is going to be a lot lower for yards per game. I'm going to add something in here where we can lower the amount of comparisons we're looking for when you find outliers. So, if we can only find 5 good comparisons, we only find 5 good ones. But it's just to give you a sense of, are you really finding the right group of comparisons for the statistics you chose? Because if you choose a lot of uncorrelated statistics, it's very difficult to find close comparisons.
Right. So this will tell you basically, you kind of how close of a match they are ultimately, right? I mean, is the comp summary. This is really close, right? You're looking at, their positional ADP was 52.1 and Rager's is 55. So that actually tells you historically he's probably pretty appropriately priced. And the prior season's point per game, the average is 2.5 for the priors. It was 7.25 for the priors, the prior 10 comps, and his was 7.2. So it's almost right on the number. So that tells you it's a pretty good set of comps. And honestly, it should be, given the fact that this is a pretty broad search. We're looking really close to him.
It's pretty basic.
Yeah. And so then it'll show you what the comp averages are. And so this is basically what your results are. Remember when we talked at the beginning, we talked about we're looking for what his ADP is going to be next year and what his points per game are going to be this year. We want to know sort of how he's going to finish this year and what that's going to look like, good or bad, in terms of where he's ranking at the position next year. So our comps on average, 68.7 in terms of ADP next year. So you're looking at a 17 spot drop, 16 and a half spot drop or so. And then points per game, he actually goes up. So he actually averages 1.6 more points per game, but it doesn't really help him. That's a falling knife value situation.
Right.
So
an important thing to note there is going to be, and now we're really going to take this thing for a drive, right? So the first thing I'll say is the average positional ADP for next year is almost always going to be lower. And the reason why is that, one, players fall in value more than they rise in value because rookies come in. That's just a fact. It's not a 50-50 proposition. It's more than a 50% chance that they drop in value. And when players drop, the drop is a lot more dramatic than the rise. So that's going to skew these numbers. So another cool statistic we put in here is basically just did their value go up or down? So we can scroll to the top now and we can add that in to the statistics you want to analyze. So if you click on analyze stats, we can go improve, type in improve.
Okay. And see, if you're looking here on the screen, I mean, again, if you're listening to this in podcast, check out the video because that's going to help you. It's going to explain to you sort of what you're doing. But we're going through all of the stats here that we have available, and we'll walk through those because I think there's some pretty fun stuff and stuff that I use in my analysis. So go ahead. I'm using improved value.
Year one, yeah. So
year one.
In this year, will their value improve? So let's click on that. Let's add that, and we scroll back down, and we can see the average there is 0.35. That means 35% of them increased in value, which means 75% decreased in value. You might say, well, there's only 10 players. How could there be a 5%? That's because one of the players stayed relatively constant.
Right. So, yeah, right on the number. Devon Bess, we thank you.
Yeah. This is what's fun about this, right? Is we can take narratives or we can take theories and we can test them, right? You would think that, I mean, Rager is a first-round draft capital player, and he's fallen all the way to 55 at his own position, not overall, at his position. And you would think that's got to be like a winning value proposition. You know, I'm going to buy low. Well, 35% of the time they keep falling from where they are now. So I think a better way of looking at this too is if we can reenact the full narrative. And this is what I did earlier, and it's super fun. So let's go back to the top. So let's first decide all the things that we want to know. So we want to know where he's going to be next year. We want to know whether he'll improve in value. We want to know his points per game. But let's also see how many hits will he have in the next 3 years. So now we're adding year 1 to 3 hit. And what that means is it's going to average the hits for the next 3 years, and a hit being a top 24 finish. It's going to average those for the 10 comparison players. So let's add that. Let's also add year 1 to 3 wins over replacement, which is going to add together all the wins over replacement for the next 3 years and average them for the 10 comparison players. What else would we possibly want to know? Let's do top half hits too. So we're going to add top half hits as well. So we want to know not just did they hit a top 24, but did they hit a top 12? And what you'll find, especially when you're analyzing some players on here, is it's really helpful to add both of those in, because you'll find that somebody has a really high chance of hitting, but not a high chance of hitting a top 12. What that means is they're probably going to be a perennial wide receiver 2 or running back 2, and you need to adjust accordingly to that range of outcomes. Other people will hit less often, but every time they hit, it's going to be a top 12. Usually they're going to be like your round 3 running backs, pass receiving running backs that are either going to have it or they're not going to have it. Super explosive guys that if they earn the trust and they get used as a workhorse, they're going to be top 12 perennially. I think that there's a lot of analysis that's been done on what's called rookie faceplant statistics. So I think it would be really fun if we add to the comparison stats, add prior ADP. So right now we're going to add prior ADP because we want to have players that were similar to where Rager was going last year.
Right.
Now let's get rid of prior.
Carlo, can we just stop here for a second? It's worth noting. I think at this point, so we are solving for a lot of things. Okay, we want to know a lot of things, and you can do a lot of things with solving this. In terms of the comparisons, Carlo, can you talk about how many comparison tools you want to use? Like how many comparison factors or inputs, comparison stats you want to use?
You'll see this as we go through now. So like it really depends how correlated they are. And also like what stage of their career they're in. So like after a year of experience, you're going to have a lot more comps, whereas people diverge, right? Especially if you're using draft capital in there. Like think about Aaron Jones versus a typical round 5 running back. Like as people diverge, you've got to use your own domain knowledge to use common sense, basically. Maybe we don't want to use draft capital on a Stephon Diggs. When he's at that stage of his career, maybe we want to use how many hits have you had prior and then group him together with other players that have hit that much, because I'm not sure how much draft capital is really going to matter once you get to that stage of your career.
It's going to be like him and Tyreek Hill.
Exactly.
Like that's going to be your comp set.
Well, and you're going to go down and you're going to look at those comparisons and you're going to see that the people in your group, in the 10-player group, they don't really match. They're missing something.
Right.
But just for argument's sake, this is super fun. Let's get rid of prior season points per game. We're just going to go purely off market data here.
Okay.
So let's scroll down and see what the results are.
All right.
So here we have 10
I see Laquan Treadwell.
Right. You already know it's not going to be good, but we're going to add other pieces of the narrative in as we go. So
okay.
Our average this year's positional ADP again is still 52.1.
Okay.
But last year the average of this group was 36.3. So they were all players that we were excited about as rookies, and they've taken a sizable drop from their rookie ADP based on a disappointing first season. Now, if we just look at that, we can see next year's projected ADP is 82. This year's points per game is 6.45, which is not great. Only 2 out of the 10 improved their value. And there's an average of 0.2 top 24s in the next 3 years.
Is that good?
It's horrendous, obviously. But we're painting a bad narrative. Also, the year 1 to 3 warp is basically
negative.
flat. It's 0. You're not adding any value with this player.
Right.
So effectively a roster clogger. But Jordan, wasn't Rager a first round wide receiver? So we're just lumping him with any other wide receivers. Let's add draft capital. So type in round.
It's notable. I would just say it is notable from just looking at this list. I know that there are a significant chunk of first-round wide receivers just on that list. So that gives you an idea. Like when we talk about player profiles, they all, kind of batch together. Like there's a lot of patterns in this. So that's really valuable. But when you look there, I didn't check, but I think it's north of 50% that's actually first-round wide receivers.
And part of that is because think about what their rookie ADP was. Why was their rookie ADP so high? It's because they were first-round wide receivers. But now
it's funny because when you say that, like it's like we talk about base rates and production stuff, but this is almost base rates in value, right? Like it's just we sort of see the same patterns repeat themselves.
And we are creating base rates. If you want to look at year 1 to 3 hits, that's basically your base rate right there. How many hits are you going to get? This is funny because it's how analytics of Dynasty really started with draft capital. And we're like, what if we add more layers onto it? Well, now we're giving people the ability to do it themselves. So it's really cool.
Now we can feel, instead of me sitting in my basement all night running stats, we can have everyone else do it too.
They're working for you now. As long as they come to you and they find something interesting, then you've just recruited a whole bunch of people, basically.
Absolutely.
So,
we love to see it.
Let's see what the averages are now. Let's see if they've improved.
Because now we actually inserted a couple of good people.
Yeah, we only have round 1 wide receivers now. So still only 2 out of the 10 improved. Mm-hmm. The average is still 80. The ADP is still wide receiver 80 next year. Points per game is still negligible. Warp is still 0. Hits are still basically 0. So that's kind of disappointing. But there's more, right? Rager didn't play a full season. So maybe people are being harsh on him because he didn't play all the games. So why don't we do last year's games played, add that into the comparison stats? That way we can get players that didn't play a full season.
So again, we're going up to comparison stats, prior season games. So that's going to tell you the games from the prior season, which is last year.
And it's going to try to find people that are similar. So if we go down and just look at these 10 players, look at the prior season games. What do we have there? Like a bunch of 11s, some 9s, some 13s. And when you look at the average games played of the people in that group, 10.9. How many games did Rager play? 11 games. Okay, so maybe these guys were unfairly punished, their ADP, because they didn't play a full season. Now, the numbers do get better. Next year's points per game average rose about 2 points, but it's still a similar outlook. The warp is almost 0, right? So you might get a slight value gain from some of these guys, but most of the time it's not an excuse. Like the full season played, it's just not. Like, and if you look at any of these players Who's the best player on that list, Jordan?
Actually, can I say what's interesting about this is we sort of walk through this narrative. It has become very bimodal. They've either been really bad or they've been really good. So you've got Allen Robinson on the list. You got Brandon Cooks on the list with almost 2.6. Or Corey Davis actually makes this list, which makes some sense. Alshon Jeffrey. So you do have some guys that have hit once you sort of add that additional filter in. Again, talking about the narrative. But it definitely is interesting as you sort of filter this stuff a little bit more. And one comp that came up for me pre-draft was actually Brandon comps for Rager. So it's actually notable to see them similar. It's funny that you have taken the games now down so that they match, and it's actually, again, you talk about creating narratives for yourself. You've just created that.
Yeah, it's awesome, right? You can add those narratives in. See, my problem is with like a lot of analysis is it's, oh, well, he had this happen, right? Well, then why don't we look at players that also had that happen? It's hard to do it just like that because we don't have it at the click of our fingers, but now we basically do. So, yeah, it's really cool. You can add other things in there like yards per route run. Basically, any way you cut or slice it, it's not a high probability that he's ever worth more than he is now. But as you say, if he hits, he's really going to hit. So you can see the volatility as well when you look at these comparisons, which is another interesting thing. Are you going to are you confident in what you're going to get? Like, we should definitely incorporate some volatility statistics in here too, going forwards. This is just a beta, we've still got a lot of things that we want to do with it, but
yeah, but it's funny because it's at this time of like we could make this the perfect thing ultimately, but then it comes out, next May. Like some of the stuff that we have, and we were just talking about this earlier. Like I think the value of some of the quarterback stuff could be just pretty epic. So, and probably different than anything out there for folks to use. So, yeah, so that's the comps there, and again, now you sort of see like, hey, if you're trying to build an narrative in, like, hey, what's success look like? Which is, I think, a great way to look at it. We'll sort of walk through a little bit of that too. And the best part about it too is like you were talking about the why 1 through 3 hits. You see what the warp is, and then you actually you'll see the different ranges of outcomes. Like, hey, this person can sort of linger and get multiple why 1 through 3 hits, but they're going to get no top 12 hits, right?
Right.
Those things appear, and it's really interesting sort of how they ultimately bear out.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And you run through this for one player and you go, okay, that's cool. Well, who else is similar? Let's go Jerry Jeudy. And you can just flick it to Jerry Jeudy and look at all the same statistics and just see how the averages change. It's very, very interesting.
So we put in Jerry Jeudy, and now we go down to the comp summary. So this will tell us our comps had actually off of the same data had 23.3 as their ADP. He's 27, so he's actually young. He's actually cheaper than his comps are. In their prior season ADP, so last year they were going on average 29.3. He was going 20. So they've actually moved. So it's his, and this could be, and one of the things I think is really valuable about this information is I think ultimately, like, this is going to kind of show that the wide receiver, the young player market in Dynasty fantasy football marketplace right now is overcooked, because we're going to see these things. Like, this is my central operating premise on this project, is that you're going to see this market actually is overcooked, that the same profiles were going too early now, and now they're falling. Whereas in the past, some of the younger guys were going later, and now, and then with the same set of information, they're actually improving. So just on a side note there. And then you see again, the draft average, they were on average his comp's 1.3 to his 1, who's obviously in the first round. And then prior season games, they averaged 15.5 and he had 16.
I did just remember one thing that's really cool. If you go back to Rager, I remember those numbers were like more optimistic than I remember, but I think so now just looking at that ADP. So if we go back to Rager, I think what happens is when you add those extra statistics in, you start getting players, if we look at their average ADPs, the fall isn't, so I think the players that actually performed well, they didn't fall as much as Rager did. So what you can do is you can add in the comparison stats, you can add, did their value improve prior season? And then that will kind of force the face planners into the sample size.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the numbers get a lot worse. So
Yeah.
we lost a lot of the good players that were in there, because I remember I noticed that when I did the comparisons, and that's why you've really got to look at the data and make sure that, you look at the players that are propping up and the players that are letting down, and you say, well, are these true comparisons? And then maybe you need to change the sample a little bit. But that's why we're giving people the ability to be their own researcher.
Can I say it's funny that we look at this and we're like, wow, these numbers are not great. But ultimately, like there are some rebounds in here. Like Tavon Austin, he wasn't really one. Golden Tate was a notable second contract. These are the two notable second contract day two guys in the past 10 years. Golden Tate, Robert Woods. So those two second contract, second team, both of those guys are in here. It's interesting. And then you see Curtis Samuel. We'll see where he goes on the second team. But again, a late contract guy. Corey Davis. We'll see what he does on a second contract with a second team. So there's actually four guys. Just looking at those four right there, four guys that basically went somewhere else after their rookie contract and notably signed for decent money. So it's actually an interesting comp set. And actually Aguilar as well. Aguilar's in that as well. Then you've got the total flameouts of Treadwell, Austin, Darius Hayward-Bay, Aurelius Ben. So I think it is an interesting comp set when you look at it.
Yeah. And what I gain from this is I would consider Rager as a buy and a flip, right? The whole buy low thing. Mm-hmm. And it's really a recurring theme as I've looked at more players. I've analyzed more players trying to do a similar thing. They just don't bounce back in terms of value. Mm-hmm. Even if production, but just in terms of value, once the market has decided, they're very stubborn. Once they flip directions, they're very stubborn in that direction. So if you're buying for a value add and flip, I think you might be disappointed.
Yeah, and it's funny because that held true, right? Like Corey Davis's value hasn't gone up. Robert Woods, he's still underpriced. Yeah, he has never really been to the value of which he should have been. Golden Tate similarly, right?
That's really your best case scenario, right? It's like perennial outperformer,
right?
That's like best case scenario with all of these guys.
Yeah, it's really interesting. How many comparison stats would you recommend, or is that at some point you get too many in there that it kind of not necessarily clogs up the system, but warps your data in a way that might not be usable?
I mean, I would argue that we already have too many, probably.
Right.
It's fine because prior ADP, current ADP, and then value drop from last season, they're all correlated. So you're forcing similar players together. But yeah, you got to understand that it's a weighted system. So we have 3 statistics there that are to do with value. And we have one that's to do with draft capital and one that's to do with performance, right? And so 3 out of your 5, they're all weighted equally. So 3 out of your 5 are just strictly to do with value. So that's the way to think about it. If everything's weighted equally, you're diluting the importance of some statistics. And we can make the weighting variable down the road, but it's just very complicated to start with.
Yeah.
So I would suggest definitely just finding archetypes with a few simple statistics that you really care about.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And then so I think that shows you. And then do you want to go back to Judy?
Yeah. Another great thing that I want to mention is that this isn't just good for going forwards. We can go back and we could say, okay, I mean, a great example would be like Josh Jacobs. A lot of people feel like he's historically cheap, like people that are on him. So you can go back and you can say, all right, this was his ADP. What was his ADP last year? What was his points per game last year? And then find the average of their current ADP. And you can say, we actually have Josh Jacobs' current ADP, and we can find out, is he historically cheap for players with the same profile? So it's not just a forwards looking thing. We can even look now at what should be and what is, and say this is an outlier.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we can. There's a lot of these things that are going to pop up in terms of, like, I've done some brief work looking at some of the comps. Just kind of doing this in an Excel form or a Google Sheets form. I think the power of this is really going to be good. So, all right, so we got Judy up here, and so again, we'll sort of walk through. So again, that positional ADP, they were the comps in this, and we had added something. I think we added improved value from the prior season, right?
Yeah. So now that we've forced, so I don't know if you remember, but before the numbers were a lot better, but now that we've forced only players that have declined in ADP.
Here, we'll take it out and we'll show it again here. Yeah. Right. So, okay. So this is the group of players here. And we took out, so the comparison stats we're using, his positional ADP for this year, his positional ADP for last year, the NFL draft round, and we want to know how many games he played last season, right? So that way any rises and falls are probably due to some form of production or performance on the field instead of, hey, he was hurt. And then again, we're solving for the same things, right? We're solving for the same things. And so, so here we go. We got, so the average positional ADP for the guys that are his comps, 23.3, Judy's 27. So he's underpriced by a little bit. Prior positional ADP, so this would have been their ADP last year. Those guys were 29.3. They actually went up in value. He was at 20 and went down in value. So that's an interesting, they went up 6 spots. He went down 7. So that's notable.
Well, when I see that, I say, there's something fundamentally different about his profile that isn't being captured, which is that the market declined on his outlook. So that's why I went back. So if you look at the statistics, the players in this sample size average 1 hit in the next 3 years. Now that's not great, but it's a lot better than the sample size for Rager. And this year they averaged 13 points per game, which is astronomically better than Rager's was, and it's very usable for fantasy. But we're including a lot of players that actually their value got better in terms of ADP. So the market, which is something that I think you and I are learning recently, the market is actually very predictive. As much as we know that there are inefficiencies that exist, wisdom of the crowd is a real thing. So and that's something else you'll find, which is astronomical. If you look at a player's profile against somebody else, and then you add positional ADP in, it really does move the points. Like, you got someone that's undervalued and you're not adding positional ADP in, and then when you add it in, the points actually do go down. So the people that the market are discounting, they do perform worse on average. That doesn't mean that the market is always right, but there's something there.
Yeah, there's signal there. And honestly, like, the best part about using real draft position, which we're doing, is it captures all those market forces, right? There's a lot of ideas in there. There's football guys' ideas. There's analytics of Dynasty ideas. There's DLF. There's UTH. There's Dynasty. There's ESPN, whoever, right? There's Joe Dynasty owner who's doing his own projections in his garage, right? Like, all of those ideas are captured in there, and that's the beauty of market data. So, again, pitching the idea that actual markets are important for, data, or market value data. So that's interesting.
And you really see it here, right? So, like, as I said, we got 13 points per game, but let's force them to be people that lost value.
Right.
And let's see what happens, because it's mind blowing.
Okay. There you go. Okay, so so the prior.
Oh, I think you put the wrong. You put year one. You got to put prior season.
I'm sorry. Prior. I'm sorry. So the prior season. So improved value from the prior season. Right. There we go. Okay.
So now it's forcing only players that went in the wrong direction, basically. So we can see the average ADPs change. It's 47 all the way up from 36 last year. And now the points per game has gone from 13 to 7. Like that's like outrageous. And we're going from 1 hit in the next 3 years to 0.2 hits in the next 3 years.
Not
20%,
good.
20% chance at 1 hit is basically in the next 3 years is basically what we're saying.
Yeah.
It's just astronomical. So there's something there. Be scared of the players that lose value. Is basically, and this might change as well because I mean the market is becoming, as people realize this phenomenon, maybe they adjust for it. So
yeah, I think this is actually one the market is adjusting to. So that's, the falling value thing. And then it's going to end up probably being a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point, right? Like it'll just be, people overdo it. It'll become a bubble essentially. So that's interesting. Now, I know we talked earlier. Is there other players you want to talk about? I think we talked about Jacobs too at some point.
Yeah, I mean that's a good one just to run through an example of. Like, let's look at this year.
Mm-hmm. So type in Josh Jacobs. Okay.
All right. So let's clear out all the analyzed stats. And let's just use prior position ADP.
Okay.
As our comparison statistic.
Just use that.
Yeah, just keep draft capital in there too.
Okay.
So we're looking at round one right wide, round one running backs, and what was his positional ADP last year?
7.
Let's get rid of prior season games. Let's get rid of improved value. Okay. We're just going to look at people in the top 12 in ADP, basically. That were first round running backs. And then let's also put his last season's point per game in.
So we want prior season point per game. Okay.
Yeah.
So the three, and you'll see at the comparison stats, the 3 stats that we want to compare Josh Jacobs to other guys and find the 10 guys closest to him over the past, 12 years, since 2008. That's what we're looking for. So we're looking for prior positional ADP, that's where he ranks in the position. We're looking for his NFL draft round. He's going to pop up first round guys, most likely. And then prior season points per game. It'll tell you sort of how he did last year in points per game. Okay.
And then let's analyze current ADP. So we want to look at what is the average current ADP of players that match that profile.
And that's just position ADP.
Correct. So if we go down, we can see that the averages in the group, the average ADP from last year of the people in this group is 8.7. Josh Jacobs was 7. The average NFL draft round is 1.7. Josh Jacobs was 1. So we got slightly higher draft capital in the group. And the average points per game was 15, and Josh Jacobs was 15.68. So we got some decent comps.
So but it's interesting. They're pretty close, but he's better at every single one of the comps. He's better than the average at where he was in value last year. He was more valuable than the comps were on average. He was at 7. They were at 8.7. He's a 1. Not all of them are 1s in terms of draft round. And he actually outperformed the group. They averaged 15 points per game last year. He averaged 15.68. So,
I would say the differences are negligible except for the draft round, right? So there's quite a few second round running backs in here, and that's mainly just a component of there aren't that many first round running backs, so we don't have a lot to play with, right? So that's the reason why. That's another reason why we put those statistics in there. We want people to know, hey, we're above average in this group. So the average current positional ADP is 13.4. For these players. So on average, they go at 13.4. And then where's Josh Jacobs going right now?
21.
21. So that's just telling you like this guy is historically cheap. Like, but
Yeah.
the question is the market adjusting for something real? That's the question. So now what we can do is, instead of analyzing positional ADP, let's get rid of that. So we're not going to look at, we don't care about current ADP. In fact, we're going to group by just NFL round and points per game.
Prior season points. So we're ignoring last year's
Right.
positional ADP.
Yeah. So get rid of last year's positional ADP.
Okay.
And then get rid of, we don't want to analyze this year's positional ADP. We want to analyze this year's points per game. This is super interesting. Let's do this year's points per game. Let's do hits in the next 3 years and warp in the next 3 years. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave the market value out of this first, and then we're gonna add it back in and see if there's actually signal to it.
So this is basically, if you were to just to think about the fundamentals, right? Just what do we know about like the on the paper numbers about the player, draft round, and where he went last year. And again, the comps must match in experience, right? So we're looking at guys that are in year 3 of their career, right? So that's where we sit with these guys. They're pretty similar. So go ahead, Carlo.
Yeah. So let's look at the comparisons. Let's look at the averages. So we've got. Oh wait, have you put prior? Oh, you have to put current points per game. So in the analyzed stats where it says prior season points per game, we want this year's points per game. Now we're doing a forward-looking study.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, so if we go down, let's see if our comparisons are actually decent. So average NFL draft round 1.4, that's decent. We've got a few extra first rounders in this study. And average points per game, 15.25. Josh Jacobs was 15.68. This is for last year. So if we just look at that profile, moving forwards, on average, these players hit 2 out of the next 3 years. Great.
Pretty good.
These players have 2.67 wins over replacement over the next 3 years. Pretty good. And their points per game this year, 15.14. So same as last year. All great. Also, Josh Jacobs was a top 8 running back last year with those points per game. So we're happy with all of that stuff. But what if we add into the comparison statistics? We already know that Josh Jacobs is historically cheap. So what if we add this year's ADP into the comparison stats and find other running backs that were similarly discounted and see what that does to future production?
So again, this is position.adp. This is positional ADP what we're looking for.
Okay, so now we're looking at players that are as cheap as him. This is super interesting. So when you now look for the discounted players, now it's important to note the average points per game for last season went down to 12.7. This is because now we're trying to force cheaper players into the sample. And usually the cheaper players didn't have as good of a performance as Josh Jacobs did last season. So he vastly outperformed these comps in terms of points per game last season. But if you see what happens to future production, now we went from 2 out of the next 3 years hitting to an average of 1 out of the next 3 years hitting. We went from over 2 wins over replacement to 1.16, and we went from 15 points per game to 11.53. So that's where you've got to decide, right? As a dynasty player, is like, he's going to fit into one of these two groups. Like, I want to say personally, it's all narrative, right? I want to say that it's more likely that he fits into the first group because there's a reason why, there's an irrational reason why he would be discounted, and that's Kenyon Drake. And if you look at Kenyon Drake's advanced statistics, I don't want to go into a whole Kenyon Drake thing, but it's like,
no, let's do it.
He's a pass catcher, and he's not good at pass catching by any metric. He's just not good at pass catching. Like, so also the Raiders have proven with like, God, what's his name? Who's the guy they drafted and literally cut in the offseason?
Lynn Bowden.
Right. They've proven that they're willing to invest in somebody and then just literally not use them.
Right.
Like,
traded them, yeah.
Traded
them at a loss.
They're willing to cut bait. They're willing, once they get them in, to be like, okay, we made a mistake. So I'm hoping that's what happens with Kenyon Drake. And then Josh Jacobs is just great. So That's an example of how you can test theories. Is the market predictive? So yeah, I think we've covered like the use cases for this. I mean, I know people are going to think of new use cases, and that's what's going to be fun. I'm really interested to see what people come up with. And we're going to add more stats going down the line, right? More advanced metrics so that we can hopefully strike some gold, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm gonna have to allot myself. It's good that we've got like a month before the season too, because like I can. It's scary how much stuff that we could actually probably go down the line of.
Dude, I'm running all of my highest share through this. I'm like, am I missing something here? Like, I'm literally going through ADP and I'm doing basic like comparisons, but I'm just going like, usually, just making sure where am I on the age curve? Like, is this guy ever going to be more valuable than he is now? Like, a lot of things have surprised me, i.e. like the Justin Jefferson thing that I mentioned to you offline earlier when I said you would think that he can only go down in value. It's not true. Like, as a 50,
Can we do it? Can we do it just because it's amazing?
It's outrageous, man. Like,
all right, let's do Justin Jefferson. And I actually, as we were thinking about this, I actually had some more ideas. So it's gonna be a late night here in the McNamara household. I got to get my Whoop recovery score.
So we got experience. So we're looking at all second-year wide receivers. We're looking at first-round draft capital. We're looking at their prior season points per game. We're looking at their positional ADP. Let's add yards per route run in the comparison stats too.
Okay, so it is worth noting that we do have some advanced stats in here, and there's going to be more. So this is a good idea to actually put some of this stuff in here. So we've got just to run down sort of what we have that you can search for. So you can search for Y1 finish, which is B this year in terms of where they finish in the position. Next year would be Y2. Y1 hit. Did they hit or not? And that's just Y1 through 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's if they hit in those 5 years, how many times they hit. If they had a hit entering this year, which is interesting in terms of when you look at some of the receivers and stuff, that's a place you could sort for. You're looking for WARP over any of the next 5-year options. Draft pick, you can use pick instead of round. Prior season positional ADP, we already talked about that. Positional ADP over the next 5 years. Prior season finish, where they finished, and some of the stuff that like some of the geeky stuff and some of the second and third order things of this particular tool. As I'm sitting here like Mr. Burns talking, this is where I think it gets really, really exciting, because you get prior season target share. Right, that'll tell you how much of players. How much of the offense that they were targeted as a receiver. These are specific receiver stats. And then you get prior season yards per route run, which is great in terms of being able to look at it and saying, hey, what's this person in terms of their yards per route run? Where they, if we think that they're pretty good, like how do those guys look out? If they're bad, how do those guys look out? What sort of signal is in there too? And then, that'll be better for the pass catching, some of the more volume catching stuff with running backs. You might not necessarily have great comps there, but receiver for sure. Okay, so I bogarted all your time, Carlo.
Say, like one of the use cases for the target share is you get a lot of like, oh man, Nick Chubb is great. Yeah, but he doesn't catch passes. Okay, well, let's use last year's target share to group together, and let's group him with other running backs that don't catch targets. Oh, okay, wait, like the wins over replacement over the next 3 years is still strong. Things like that. Also, I gave you that Eckler example where I have that theory that even though he's old, so like the warp falls off at his age, especially if you're looking at 3 or 4 years down the line. Well, what if we put in his target percentage as well? So we're only putting in pass catching backs because there's that mantra that the pass catching backs have more longevity. You can test all of those things with that. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah,
let's put yards per route run on. Let's just like give him all the stuff that he just crushed. We'll do target share too. Do last year's target share.
Oh, I got to do. Sorry, I put wide per route run. So prior season yards per route run.
Yeah, prior season yards per route.
Make sure I use my own tool right here. So
I mean, it's
Okay.
still new, right? We're still getting
I know.
used to it. And
Yeah,
just prior season target share too.
this is going to be
We're just gonna get elite of elite people in their rookie season, basically.
okay. So this is so we're showing all the results here. Prior season target share 20. It's in a decimal, but it's a percentage, so it's 25.91. There is the target share. And so the results. I mean, how about this for a set of comps? Hall of Famer.
Like look at the Waltz like averages though down the bottom. Like it's
right. Yeah,
it's outrageous.
It's incredible. Okay, so here we go. So the comp averages. So they average on average it's 2 hits, 1.87 warp over the next 3 years, which for a receiver is just
for a receiver, that's fantastic.
Incredible. And then for points per game, 14.7. I mean, man, it's just really robust. Yeah. You had something too here, and actually he outperformed them in terms of he's actually more valuable than them now. Yeah. He actually outperformed them in points per game.
He doesn't have comps. Like he's more valuable. He's way more yards per route run than the average. He even had a higher target share. Like he just like crushes. Like he's in a good group and he's elite in that group. So like I was really worried. I'm on the side of like if you ever have a player that's that valuable, just sell them. But if you add to the actual statistics that we want to average, if you add improved value season 1, I'm pretty sure it's or if you even just look.
You told me this on the phone today, and I almost swerved off the road because I was on the phone. I was using hands-free device.
Don't put it there. Put it in the stats. But so I don't know if we're using the same combination of statistics. You put year 1 target share in comparison stats. Just pop that one out.
Year 1 target share. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay.
So let's just see if what percentage of players dropped in value. Yeah, so basically he's a 50-50 to stay where he is. Like, and he's at wide receiver 2. Like,
right.
And he's 50-50 to stay where he is. That is just like, that's just outrageous.
Correct. Yeah, it's just incredible. It's just you sort of look at what and then we can actually look too. We want to analyze the stat. We want to look for ADP, right? So we're looking for. Let's check out what All right, let's see what positional ADP that'd be next year. Would be year 2, right, Carlo?
Right.
Okay, so
it's going to be lower than his ADP, but you've got to remember the sample have lower this year's ADP, if that makes sense.
Correct. Yeah. So on average, they're 11.6. So just think about that, and you look at some of the guys too. They don't even compare. Like we sort of talked about how they can be so far. Like look how far apart he is in terms of yards per route run. That's incredible. And then so you're picking up some guys that are not quite even in the neighborhood, let alone they might not even be in the city, let alone the same neighborhood.
That's the problem with the engine is it literally comes up with a numerical value for how close they are based on those statistics, and it's giving you the top 10. But I really need to set a threshold limit to where it's like if it's not within this amount, just don't even put them there, because when you get players like this, you're just gonna get weird like outliers that match to them because there's no one else that is as close. Like,
yeah. So so when we're reading this, we're reading it from top down. So it's AJ Green, Mike Evans, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Michael Thomas. Those are the top 5 guys. Are those the top 5 closest ones? Do they sort of rank?
That is correct. Actually, I forgot to mention that, but yeah, they are. It's literally top to bottom. So the closest comps are at the top.
Right. It's interesting. I've always said that that the Amari Cooper profile was a little overcooked young in his career. I don't think it was. Now that I look at that, like this is like the comps that he has into, right? Maybe he's a little bit low on the points per game scale, but it's just crazy, like the strata that he was in.
Such a strange career arc.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting. I have some additional thoughts that I'm going to have to share with you offline in terms of future stats that we can put in, because I have some ideas for this that are going to be I think it's going to be controversial, Carlo, because I spot some outliers that we can definitely find that are very popular in the Analytics Dynasty community that are going to regress. I'll just say that. I'm looking at you, Mr. AJ Brown. So, yeah, so that's pretty much it. So you can find it. We will have the actual address to, as we are recording this, my link is actually not accessible, so I'm not going to read it to you. You like if this isn't live, I'm recording this a couple days in advance of when it's going to be released, but it's not technically live. I'm not going to give you the URL specifically. I'll put it in the show notes, that way you can see it and click on it and go ahead and take a peek. See. So Carlo, any last thoughts that you had?
No, I mean, if anyone listened this far into it, like without just running to their computer and jumping on it, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that we just spent doing for the last hour, it's like, dude, you could have done a lot more yourself and just you spend days on this, man.
Yeah, for sure. So I think definitely the use cases, in particular, like the guys that really change in value, right? Narratives, so easy testable here. It's a place you might want to look for guys that you have a lot of. Right. Like, or you just, they look weird, right? Like, why is this person going here? Like, or you see these narratives, right? I think the narrative testing, and that's, if I could go back and do Analytics Dynasty over again, I'd probably make it Dynasty Mythbusters would probably be the name of it. But you can sort of go in and look at this stuff, right? Is it a lot of times the stuff that we hear is just BS, right? Is that true? Like, you are empowered to go find those things now. And that's really the value of this, that I think, it's really valuable. The closest comp for Justin Jefferson, the three closest comps are probably going to be Hall of Famers, right? We'll see with AJ Green, Mike Evans, and Julio are on first ballot tracks at this particular point in their career. Yeah. That's incredible, right? That's the level of what you're dealing with. So, and those are the closest ones to him. So I think it's really valuable. And we'll be interesting.
We're working from the player forwards as well, right? Like, This isn't a bad player on this list, but we started with the player. We didn't go to the good players first. Like, we didn't use confirmation bias. We didn't go to good players and say, oh, like Justin Jefferson's similar to all of these, but maybe some bad players are included in those comps too. They're just not, though.
Right. They're just not. Right. Eddie Royal's probably the worst one. Right.
But if you look, he's like, the numbers aren't close.
Right.
Like, if we had the Euclidean distance actual statistic up there, which would mean nothing to anybody, I can guarantee you there'd be a big drop off at some point around that 6 or 7 mark. So I've got to build something in for that too. When there's a big gap, maybe I'll just cut it right there. But
what's interesting, like when you look at this list, is I'm sort of going back through this and sort of hearkening back, like it's been essentially, has your career been shortened by injury or seriously impacted by injury? Crabtree Crabtree was hurt on and off early in his career. Sammy Watkins with the foot stuff, and then it never really got back on track. Odell Beckham Jr., a lot of his stuff didn't really get back on track. I think Eddie Royal was hurt too, if memory serves. Dez's career fell off. We'll see with Michael Thomas, but like that's the strata. Like it's been basically, have you been like injured? and that's just an incredible thing.
They didn't just have an amazing first season and then turn around. They just weren't good anymore. Like
right.
None of them just didn't, like, no reason. They just showed up to camp and they just weren't as good. Like it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, also one like cautionary note I want to say. I mean, the comps are only as good as the statistics you put in, right? So if you put garbage statistics in there, you're going to find weird comps. Like, I mean, people do it on Twitter all the time. It's like, these are all the people that, caught a ball with their left hand and they will also
have blue eyes, right? Yeah. Like, yeah.
Right. So you can find comparisons based on any statistic you want. But if those statistics aren't like causal or like actual measurements of quality, like yards per route run and things like that, points per game, target share, we all know that they're skill statistics, right? They're not luck. So that's one cautionary tale I'll say. It's junk in, junk out, good stuff in, good stuff out.
Yeah, you're better, because I would have a different word for the junk. So, and again, so one of the things that, like, we will have more advanced stats coming out in this, which is really exciting. And we'll have all of those things so you can look at. I think really the big thing now is like the finishes, sort of the arcs, right? That's the valuable stuff. The other thing too, I would note that, you can test this on your own. We won't go super into it, but I think one thing that we've sort of found with this, it looks like that market value is actually more predictive. And it's really predictive of kind of like future market value. So once you sort of get, like you mentioned something to me earlier, which is when you get a guy who's falling in price, it's really not a rehab of value project.
Mm-hmm.
You're really trying to rehab their production, and you're probably losing on the market value side. Like you kind of got to know that's the bet. Which I think is interesting. You'll see those trends pop up, but that's a theory we've kind of been operating on, and it really does show up again here.
Sure.
So that'll pretty much do it. Again, if you have listened to this and gotten through an hour and 6 minutes of this podcast form, the link will be in your show notes. So go ahead and take a look at that. If you have watched this on YouTube, the link to the actual tool will be available in there. So go ahead. We'll take, and actually we're going to probably at some point here do like a free preview. So you won't necessarily need to be a subscriber to use this. Subscribers will have access to it and can use it. But it will probably make it a promotional thing. So if you're not a subscriber, go ahead and check out the link, and you'll get some opportunity here probably in like the first week of August to go through, look at it a little bit, use it, and see what you like. So that'll pretty much do it for this special edition, special episode, special show. I'm your host, Jordan McNamara. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for Carlo for coming on and participating with me in this fun endeavor that we're on. And that'll do it. Until next time, continue embracing the variance, and we're going to talk again real soon.